Hello and welcome to the CX Files podcast. I'm your host, Mark Hillary. I'd like to wish a Happy New Year to all of our listeners. This is the first show of 2022. Can you remember when we started 2021 and thought that COVID was going to be over soon? Well, in this 2022 opener, we're going to take a look at the CX issues you should be focused on this year, and probably a bit of COVID as well. My co-host Peter Ryan of Ryan Strategic Advisory is joining from Montreal in Canada, and we also have Stephen Loynd, the founder and principal of TrendzOwl in Virginia, USA, and Lian Rowlands, the Director of Partnerships at Conversations by Amy. Lian is based in the UK, so this is a global look ahead at CX in 2022. Okay, Stephen and Lian, it's great to have you here. And Peter Ryan is also here as co-host as well. And he's going to be jumping in and firing some questions at you as well. But I think that just to kick off, let's go with you in turn. Now, just remember, we are recording this just before the end of the year, but this is going to be going out in the first week of 2022. So Stephen, could you look back and say what were some of your CX highlights for 2021 first?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me. I think from a high level, when I look at 2021, all the things that everybody's talking about, the influence of the pandemic continued to embed, if you will, the rapid implementation of CX into our lives on a much deeper level. And I had been talking with you guys earlier about a forecast that I just published a few weeks ago about the BPO market in the United States. And my basic theme is around this idea of the exponential age, which is upon us. And so while COVID is interesting and a major theme to talk about, so too is the rapid implementation of tools such as cloud technology, APIs, the apparatus or platforms, if you will, that are accelerating the rate of change for tech companies. And that includes the provision of the CX. And the idea that this theme for me that became so obvious in 2021, which is that change is accelerating, but change is also cumulative, this idea of exponential rapid change and rapid adoption of, for the sake of our discussion, the omni-channel capabilities in the CX. And so that's the most important and interesting thing to me, Mark. And I heard this wonderful turn of phrase or expression in relation to AI, but I thought about it, and for me, the CX, I'm thinking I'll probably write a blog on this, the ambient CX, the idea that AI is now so inextricably interwoven with the customer experience. And so AI-enabled CX and the employee experience, EX, it's humming always now in the background of our lives, whether we're at home or when we leave home. And so companies, organizations have become aware there's no going back. It's that anticipatory quality of the CX that will make it increasingly ambient going forward. We're now kind of enmeshed in this flourishing, intelligent ecosystem. So there's a long kind of bloviation on 2021 from my perspective.
Yeah, that's a great observation. And I think that, clearly the millions of smart speakers that are now sitting in everybody's home are clearly one very overt demonstration of that ambience that you're talking about. Lian, let's hear from you about 2021, and then we can jump in and get Peter's thoughts on some of your comments there.
Yeah, 2021, from my perspective, in terms of what we've seen, certainly across Tamar and across Conversations by Amy, has been just the sheer pace of adoption of technology to enable that work from home, that urgency to work from home. The adoption was fast and furious, I think, is probably the best way to put it. And a lot of people panic bought. And what we saw towards the end of 2021 was people starting to come back around that circle, which is, okay, so work from home is here. Work from home is here to stay. It's here to stay for a period of time, whether some people would say 3 years, 5 years, permanently. The change has happened. To Stephen's point, it's happened and we won't go back from it. The lid is very much off Pandora's box in that respect. And what we've seen at the end of 2021 is people coming back around that buying circle to go, okay, we bought in haste because we needed something to plug those gaps to enable our workforces to support customers and to support whether it be B2B, B2C. And now they're coming back to go, okay, how do we do this? I hesitate to use the word, but how do we do this properly? How do we do this with a permanence? How do we do this with a long-term vision, not just the short-term vision, which was plug the gap and make something happen? So a lot of my conversations, August, September, October time, were, okay, we need to come around again. We need to take another look at this strategically rather than, oh God, we need something to make this happen, and we need something to just quickly enable. Because again, to Stephen's point, AI is now becoming embedded and enmeshed in our society, and enmeshed and embedded into CX. But the conversations now are, how good is the AI that we're embedding into our processes, and how good is the AI that we're embedding into our customer experiences?
Okay, yeah. I mean, immediately I picked up there the panic buying of 2020 moving into the strategy of this year. Work from home being embedded into the solution, omni-channel, and the ambient CX. So what did you pick up from that, Peter?
Very similar topics and very similar themes, Mark. And I would very strongly agree that we are going into 2022, I think, much more married up on strategy as an industry and as a collective group of executives than perhaps anybody thought we would have been maybe at the start or the end of 2020. There's no two ways about it. AI and virtual working, remote working, are both structural parts of what we're doing in customer experience management, and they're going to be moving forward. They just have to be. There's always been a lot of rhetoric around these two topics. And Steve and I wrote our first reports on home-based agents back in the early to mid 2000s, and it was always being heralded as the next big thing, but there was never that catalyst to really make it take off. And very clearly, what happened in March 2020 was that catalyst. AI has been one of the most nebulous topics for years, but I really don't think that we started to see any real take up or any real draw on it until recently. And that's because the solution providers got smart and they started thinking, we've got to stop talking about this from a 40,000 foot view. We've actually got to show how not just can help the consumer, but how it can help the agent do their job better. And since we've been seeing this laser focus both on remote delivery and on artificial intelligence and AI enabling different functions within the CX space, there's been, I think, much more of a direction and a strategic take up in terms of where the industry needs to go, which I think is a great thing going into 2022. There's still going to be a lot of disruption that the sector and quite frankly, all industries are going to face. But I really believe now we're at the point where we can talk about true value add and true delivery of customer experience in the best possible fashion, whereas before there was, as I say, a lot of rhetoric, but quite frankly, people weren't really delivering on what they were talking about. Okay, well, that's a great look back at last year. But Stephen, what are you looking forward to in 2022? I mean, what are your clients talking to you about, and what are people getting excited about for the coming year?
I think of two things, Mark. The first one that I talk about in my forecast is this idea that the outsourcing imperative, if you will, is going to become more pronounced in the BPO world as far as the CX goes. Enterprises, in other words, know that they need to build more resilience and flexibility into their models. And outsourcing offers that like never before because of the context of the times we're living in. The business case to outsource in what seems to be an increasingly fragile, unpredictable world should become even more stark than even as Peter mentioned, 15 years ago when we were talking about home shoring, Now, as he pointed out, suddenly enterprises need to consider what I refer to as emergent phenomena. Everything from climate and viruses are impacting businesses. But there's another important thing to keep in mind. And I think Lian touched upon this a little bit. There will be increased penetration of outsourcing, in my mind, due to enterprise requirements related to scale, technology, increasing service complexity. Back to my mentioning of omni-channel, and as overall customer engagement volumes increase in many industries due to expanding global demand, let's hope that continues. In particular, from things like e-commerce, enterprises, they understand now they need to go to specialist BPO providers to deal with those technology-related issues around expertise. The second quick point that I want to make, and I had actually jotted down, Lian used the term fast and furious, and then Mark, you said panic buying, and Peter mentioned the word catalyst. For me, because of not just COVID, but this exponential age that we're caught in, it's a slipstream that we're all in now. And I don't know about you guys, but those things that you mentioned makes me feel it's all going too fast. All these dazzling network effects, as far as the eye can see, I wrote about this in my last blog in August. The rules of supply and demand seem to have been superseded by speed and scale. Now, this is all very exciting, but I've also posted on LinkedIn, and I'll shut up in a second, these warnings, if you will, from people I really respect. Charlie Munger talking about the markets and how crazy things seem to be possibly getting. Paul Singer did a piece yesterday in the Financial Times about critiquing kind of the enthusiasm of the market. So, and I only bring that up because, from the kind of the macro, looking at things from a higher level, how, if there is kind of an adjustment, dramatic adjustment, whether it's next year, that you can never predict these things, but how will that impact our industry? What firms will survive, and how will that ripple through finally to the consumer? That we have all become so expectant in the ambient CX idea that we want everything and be able to get it seamlessly. But if our lives continue to be disrupted, it seems to me consumers are going to be even more impatient and short as far as their patience goes for any sort of interruption. AWS yesterday is maybe an example of some of the frustrations I saw flickering out there. So a lot of ideas, but those two main themes, Mark and Peter, are what I've been thinking about for next year.
Yeah, I think that speed and scale point is really valid. And a great example of that is the food delivery apps that everybody is using all over the world. Millions and millions of people are making millions of orders every day, and yet not one single app has ever turned a profit. So
yeah.
How is this sustainable?
Oh, the delivery stuff, it's crazy. Like the amount of money, VC money in the United States going into, and that's one example of the sectors. And then I posted this on LinkedIn and I think Twitter yesterday. Even Europe now, the amount of money, VC money going into tech companies, including CX related. We used to criticize Europe, there's no unicorns in the tech industry. And all of a sudden, speed and scale, it seems like now they're taking off like a hockey stick, at least as far as an investment goes, as far as the money being pumped into it. But that goes back to my idea of, the fast and furious, as Lian said, like, where is this all headed? There's going to be a lot of great things in innovation, but are we going a little too fast? I don't know,
So Lian, where are we heading then?
I actually think Stephen's made a really good point, actually, because there's so much going on. We've got this bow wave coming. I think there is so much technology around at the moment, and again, to Stephen's point, particularly in Europe, everywhere you look, there's a company saying we can do this, we can do that, we can plug into anything that you've got. And I think it is definitely what we want to see, what we'd like to see is businesses taking a step back and actually thinking strategically about the tech that they're going to plug in. What do they want? What do they want their technology ecosystem, and what do they want their stack to look like? And that's really important because we're already seeing some of the big players who provide kind of agent desktop type, single pane of glass type products. We're already seeing them kind of start to try and develop their own chatbot and their own artificial intelligence and their own this and their own that, and almost. Whereas what we're actually seeing customers want, or we're actually seeing clients want, is actually something that's agnostic, that has that API plugin capability for businesses to be able to choose what they want that fits their business and their business model, by saying, well, I want that to plug in there and I want that to plug in there, and I'd like this particular piece of artificial intelligence to plug in here so it can look at that. You've got to think about it holistically, and we are starting to see a lot of companies kind of come to us and have those conversations about, well, what plugs in where, because otherwise, if we're not careful, we end up back in a situation where you have, company X that says, oh, we've got this platform and our platform does everything. And the reality is no one platform does everything brilliantly. You want to be able to take best in class things that suit your business and your customer journeys and the customer experiences you want to give them. And you want to be able to plug those in to create something special. And I think that's really, really important because we are running out of time. Customers have already completely failed. I mean, we see hundreds of thousands of conversations a week, and customers are already very, very bored of I'm sorry, we can't get to you because of COVID-19. We can't get to you now. You've got to wait for 20 minutes. Nobody's there. Our operation is still only 9 to 5. It's the patience is, to Stephen's point again, their patience is running out. With our inability, COVID's been around for 18 months, nearly 2 years, and we're going to have to learn to live with it. It's about time we got our tech stacks in order to be able to say, okay, if work from home is permanent, what supports people best, what supports our agents best. If our customers need to get to us out of hours, what supports our customers best? What geographies do we have to consider? And any limitations of the technology that we can put in those geographies. All of that has to be considered in the light of any individual customer journey. And I think 2022 is going to be a real wake-up call. It's going to really, really push that agenda quite hard.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point there as well about COVID, and there is a wake-up call for any customer service team that is still putting on their IVR, sorry, we're delayed because of COVID. In March, this is going to be a 2-year anniversary. And if you haven't sorted it out inside 2 years, then you're probably never going to. So let's just wrap up with the final comment from Peter then. I mean, particularly maybe on Stephen's point there about BPO outsourcing and how it's going to become like exponentially more important next year.
Well, I think that it will. And I truly think we've seen the green shoots of this over the course of the past little while. Research that we conducted at Ryan Strategic Advisory amongst the buying community, amongst the enterprise CX decision makers showed there was a net uptick in the adoption of outsourced solutions over the course of 2020 through to the first quarter of 2021. And I have no doubt in my mind, when I look at the volume of questions and requests coming across my desk from the outsourcing community about how to deal with clients in specific industries or how to deal with prospective clients in different countries. In many cases, organizations that have never used outsourcing before. It truly speaks to the fact that the value of third-party delivery is very, very important. It's only going to get more important. And I think it goes back to what both Lian and Steve were saying about the growth of AI and the growth of remote working. These are concepts, these are solutions that many different enterprise organizations have got no background in. They have no concept how to apply them in the right way. And I think finally, they're looking towards the third-party community, a community that many prospective buyers eschewed for a long time and wanted nothing to do with. But now they're seeing that this is the time to go to the experts. This is the time to go to an organization that can truly help and truly support a transition towards new, more effective, more innovative business models when it comes to delivering CX.
All right, Peter, Stephen, Lian, that was a great look forward to 2022. This is the first week of the new year. And next week, Peter and I are going to start presenting each week together. So it's going to be slightly different from now on, hopefully even better than ever. But thanks to all you guys for introducing 2022.
Thanks for having me.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for downloading the CX Files podcast. If you have a moment, please give us a star rating or review on your favourite podcast provider, because this really helps other people to find the podcast. If you have any suggestions for future guests, or ideas, people or topics, then please just find myself, Mark Hillary, or Peter Ryan on LinkedIn and send a suggestion.